The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Single Table Dedupe Fundamentals class. This is Olivia. I'm the Product Adoption Manager at Theorem Fusion, and I'll be giving the class today. Today's a 2-hour class. We may take the full 2 hours, it may not, just depending on how many questions we have. But we're going to go over the Single Table Dedupe, just the basics of it. There's another class for advanced concepts that you can also attend, but this is a good prerequisite for that class. Everybody is in listen-only mode, so if you have questions, I would hope that you ask them. I just need you to type them into the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. When I see a question pop up there, I will read it out loud and then provide the answer back so everybody can benefit. All right, looks like we still have some people logging in, so I'm just going to give this another minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so you guys should be able to see my screen. We're logged into Demand Tools. And on the first page, you're always going to see the Demand Tools Today page where you have access to the self-help, which is our knowledge base and just the general help documentation, how-to stuff. Live training, you've probably seen this since you're here today. And then if you qualify for technical support, you can click that tile and log a case. This session is being recorded, so if anybody wants a recording, you can also log a case to request that. Even if you don't qualify for technical support, you can still use that to request the recording. All right, so the single table dedupe is listed under cleansing, and that's where we start with our deduplication effort. If you want to get to the single table dedupe specific help, you can click that green and white question mark, and that'll take you to the help talks that start at single table dedupe. And here it goes over the tool and some different options that we have embedded throughout the tool that we'll talk about today. But a lot of what we talk about is also in the help docs, including our dedupe best practices, which is on the main page of cleansing. And if you click the text that says single table dedupe, it will launch the module for you. Okay, so when we talk about finding duplicates, we always suggest that you have a multi-phase approach. A lot of people think you're going to come in here and run the deduper once per object, find all your dupes, and move on. And for some people, that may be possible, but for the majority of us, you most likely will have to do multiple passes across each object, just analyzing the data in a different way in order to find the duplicate. So we always recommend a rigid to loose approach. And if you look at our pre-built scenario list here, you'll see that our naming convention follows that best practice. Okay, so the pre-builts are great jumping off points. You can use them as places to get started, but we do encourage you to customize this for your specific, needs and data. And we all have custom fields. We all have our own special way of dealing with our data, and that's going to have to, have an effect on how we find our duplicates too. So while I can give you a good starting off point, it really will be up to you to know your data and really figure out which fields are best. There's a couple different ways to start with the single table dedupe, and since we're talking about pre-builts, we'll start here. And I just want you to know that when you click on a pre-built scenario, you get a little synopsis here in the center portion. The fields that are listed in red, those are indicating your mapping types and fields to match on that are selected in the next screen. So this is just a synopsis of all the scenario details. But like I said, they can be used as is or they can be modified. But if you're looking for something and you're like, well, I know I want to match on the name and the address, this would be a close one to start with since it already has those fields populated. So we have a set that focuses on the billing address field and then a set that focuses on the shipping. But you might use custom address fields, and in which case that's fine. You just, build your own. Or again, you can still modify, what we're doing here. So to load a scenario that we see in this list, you can just double click. It's loading. My computer's just taking forever, and I don't know why. There it goes. Okay, now if you have a scenario saved elsewhere on your computer, you would click the load scenario button, and this allows you to navigate out to your different locations that you have access to. But if you don't want to use um, any of this stuff and you just want to start from scratch, you can do that by selecting the object from the drop-down that you want to dedupe and then clicking Use Object. Okay, I'm starting with accounts today because our best practice does say that we want to dedupe our accounts first, then our contacts, then leads, then any other custom object or non-standard object thereafter. Okay, and if you do use leads, just as a note, if you are going to use the lead to contact and lead to account dedupers, we do recommend that you get, like I said, your accounts, contacts, and leads cleaned up in a single table dedupe in that order, and then move on to lead to contact and lead to account if you need to. But the dedupers are listed in the order that we think you should run them. So we're going to start with an account scenario, and I'm going to load up a pre-built. So I'm just going to double click this one again. And in either instance, whether you load a scenario or decide to start from scratch and choose the object drop-down, the next step is always to move over here to the right and select which field you want returned to you when we bring you back the duplicate results. So on the third screen, we show you, based on your settings, here are the results that we have and here are the records that are duplicates. What fields of those records will help you decide, number one, if you really do like the matches that were brought back, and number two, which record in that group should be the master. So definitely bring in, the fields that you think you're going to match on. This is not saying that these are the fields we're going to match on. We do that on the next screen, but it helps to see the fields that you are going to match on in your results. So that's why I think it's a good idea to select them here. But I do want to make it clear that the field selection here and then the mapping that we do on screen two are completely separate. Okay, one does not rely on the other. So we have the account name, the address information, who owns the record, and then the phone number. And you're going to notice that there's plus signs here over on the left, right? So you've got your checkboxes for your fields, and then you have the plus signs. Those plus signs indicate table joins. So if you look here, the owner table join has been expanded. And you can see that the name field for owner is checked off, which correlates to the owner.name field here. Okay, so notice that the fields that came directly from the account page layout and account field just have the field name. Ones that come from a joined table will have the table name in front of it and then a dot and the field name. These table joins tend to get a little bit big, and you can always tell you're in one because you have these double lines here, or triple, just depending on how deep you go. I always like to smush them back down when I'm done using them just to keep things clear, but that's all personal preference. And then if there's other fields you want to pull in, you can certainly do that. Okay, and this is sort of touchy, so you do have to check the checkbox. If you wanted to rearrange your fields, you can just drag and drop. Okay, and then the bottom portion is asking, which records are we going to evaluate while we search for duplicates? And you can evaluate all your records, or you can just look at a subset. So we're going to focus on this first tab here. The rest of these should be covered in our advanced concepts class. So the select records to search, if you keep it at use all, it's going to, in this case, evaluate all of our account records. Which, like I said, if that's what you want, perfectly fine. Sometimes people don't have, millions of records, or maybe they just want to look at a particular subset of the data. So they use conditions to tell the system specifically which records should be evaluated as we look for duplicates. You'll have access to all of your fields, so you can create conditions on whatever field fits best. I'm going to use a state field, and we're going to say we're only going to let the system evaluate records where the billing state, I choose my operator, exclamation point equal sign represents not equal to. We're going to say billing state equals OH, a comma for or, no space after the comma, and then your next value. And then you click add condition, and it brings it down here to the bottom. And that's how the system knows specifically which records to evaluate. You can get a bit more granular, and let's say we want it to be in those states, but we also want the city to be something specific. So let's say city equals Cleveland or Pittsburgh. Okay, so now these two conditions are anded to each other. Both have to evaluate out in order for records to be considered. So they, has to be one of those 3 states and one of those 2 cities. If you wanted your conditions to be ORed to each other, you can do that by turning on expert mode. Okay, when you check the expert mode checkbox, you get these OR groups over here to the right. And if a condition shares the same OR group number with another condition, those conditions are ANDed to each other, right? Which is still the default behavior. To make them OR to one another, you can click inside the OR group and either type a 2 or use the directional arrows and click enter. Now that they're in separate groups, they are OR to one another. So we will evaluate records in one of those 2 cities or in one of those 3 states. Okay, but the 2 conditions don't aren't ANDed together anymore. You are allowed to have multiple conditions in each group, so there isn't a standard, saying you can only have 1 in each group. So you've got to sort of think about this like the parentheses you would use in the Salesforce reporting when you're trying to use OR groups. Okay, so let's just recap the first screen a little bit. You choose the object you want to dedupe and click Use Object, or you can load a scenario. And you can either load a scenario by double-clicking one of the pre-votes or clicking Load Scenario and navigating out to a location on your computer where you may have saved a scenario. Then we come to the right and select the fields that we want to view when the duplicate results are brought back. Okay, so these are viewable fields only. And then at the bottom, we tell the system whether we want to look at all of our data for that object or using conditions, just look at a subset. I'm actually going to remove my expert mode and I'm going to get rid of the second condition. And to remove a condition, you click the blue box to the left and then delete on your keyboard. That sort of deleting is going to be consistent throughout the tool. So if you're like, how do I delete something? Typically it's going to be if you see that blue box or there might be a gray box like that. If you click that and click delete on the keyboard, you should be able to delete. All right, don't forget if you have questions, type them into the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll keep an eye on that. All right, so let's move to step 2. And this screen is populated with information because I'm using a pre-built. Had I not used a pre-built, this would be blank, and to populate it, you would have to come to the bottom and click Add Mapping Condition. When you click Add Mapping Condition, you can see that it's asking you to select a field, and then over on the right, select a mapping type. The fields, well, let's put it this way. This screen is telling you which fields have to match in order for records to be seen as duped, and the mapping type is how they have to match. So they don't necessarily have to be identical or exact. And you'll notice back on screen 2, I did decide to pull in the fields that I kind of thought I was going to match on. Okay, so if you want to toggle between these 2 screens, that's fine to make whatever modifications are necessary. Okay, so what we're going to talk about on this screen is how we match data, some of what the mapping type definitions are, and then just, how to work with here, where to click and stuff like that. Going back to the best practice of recommending a multi-phase approach, we want you to start off rigid. So what does a rigid scenario look like? For you, I can't be 100% sure, but let's pretend that, we can all use the same thing and just have an idea of what the rigid is. And this would be it, for us anyway, and what we think maybe 80% of people could use, because we're matching on name, street, city, postcode, and phone. So I want to stress that these fields are anded to each other. There is no ORing that can happen here. The ORing occurs when you run another scenario, and maybe you match on less fields or different fields, and or using different mapping types, okay, or a combination of all three. So the reason we're calling this rigid is because for me, if I'm saying that, one record matches based on name, the address, and the phone number, I feel very confident that, yeah, those are probably the same company and I don't need duplicates in here. But again, it's going to be up to you guys to figure out that definition for your data and your processes. But this is a really great place to start. The way this works is we say, okay, name, street, city, postcode, and phone have to be populated on records in order for them to be considered in this path. The reason for that is because we only match populated fields to populated fields by default. And this is, what I'm telling you right now will make a little bit more sense when we look at the result grid, but I'm going to try to explain it. But if you're not quite getting it just yet, wait till we look at the results and it might click. So for instance, if we have two records in Salesforce, one has, and we'll pretend they're just CRM Fusion records, okay? The details aren't important. But they both have name filled out, street, city, postcode. One has a phone number, one doesn't. So one phone number is populated, one is blank. Because our default behavior is to match populated to populated, that duplicate would not be returned in this path. We would have to run a path where we don't match on phone because we can't match a populated field to a blank field. We just don't see those pieces of data as the same because they're not. One's there and one isn't. So that's what I'm saying. You might have to do another path where you just either omit fields or add fields based on what you're looking for. Now, you can broaden your reach a little bit and say, in addition to matching populated to populated, I also want to be able to match a blank to a blank. So we still can never match populated to blank, but we can match blank to blank and populated to populated. And to turn on the match blank capability, you check that checkbox. So that now says, okay, if we've got two records or more that match on name, street, city, postcode, and neither of them have a phone number, then yes, we can return that result. Or if both of them have a phone number, we can return that result. Obviously, assuming if they match the proper way. Okay, but let's say I didn't want to match on phone, but I still wanted to see it in my results. You just make sure you have the field selected here so you can still view the data. And then in step 2, you click that blue box again to the left and then delete to remove the field. The clear mapping button, just so you know, clears off the whole screen. Now I'm going to add that back in. All right, the match category, don't worry yourself with it. It doesn't do anything in the way of how your data is matched, but it is a filter for the mapping type, which I really just don't even think is hardly useful anymore. But so you know what it is. Right now it says all. So when I click my mapping type, I see every mapping type we have available. If I change this match category to numeric, it filters this down and it now shows me the mapping types that were specifically designed to work with numbers. Doesn't mean that other ones can't, just means that these in the beginning were the ones that were. So like I said, I don't really like the filter, but it's there. The mapping types, however, are pretty interesting and they're going to dictate how the data is matched. Some of them are customizable, some of them aren't. Bubble 5 is going to give you a link here to the help doc that has the definition. Okay, and I'm going to go over the definitions of the ones that we're looking at today, but The rest of them will be listed here, okay? Okay, so for the name field, when we're talking about company name, whether that be on, when you're matching on leads or accounts, I really like starting off with the clean account name mapping type. It's very flexible in what it can do, and it's also customizable. It references this Edit Account Cleaning List button on the top left. And when I click that, I can see the different settings that correspond to the clean account name mapping type. And I also have a little editor where I can make additions or take things away. The Replace tab, well, let me say this first. These say replace and remove, and I want you to rest assured that we're not actually changing your data in Salesforce as we're passing the data through these mapping types. This is strictly just for analyzation purposes, okay? Now, of course, when you merge data, yes, some of it may get changed, but at this point, as we're evaluating it, there is no physical replace or physical removal in Salesforce. It's just that replace and removal in the analyzation step. The Replace tab looks anywhere in the string of the value. If we see a hyphen or a period, a comma, we're just ignoring it and seeing it as a blank. Now, you don't have to go through and put every punctuation. We do have an alpha clean engine that you can turn on with this. But you can also do things like making an ampersand be seen synonymous to the word and. So Johnson ampersand Johnson can match to a record called Johnson and Johnson. Okay, you can also do word abbreviation substitutions, like Saint would be parsed down and seen as ST, or center and center spelled RE. Okay. The takeaway here is that it is not case sensitive, and when you're working with Word, the long form goes on the left, the short goes on the right, and don't use punctuation in the words. So you'll notice we don't have ST period. And there'll always be an open spot at the bottom here for you to make any additions. So if you're like, well, I know all my hospitals in the database, some people call hospital, some people in a rush will call it hosp. So now let's add it to my replace list. So if something is called Lake West Hosp and Lake West Hospital, they can still match. Yeah, so the question, how did I get to a replace value editor? That edit account cleaning list button is kind of highlighted in orange right now on the top left. And yes, this is the customizable portion of the mapping type. And not every mapping type is going to be customizable, but this one is. So this account cleaning list button directly correlates to the cleaned account name. Okay, and also the acronym cleaned will use this editor as well. All right, so once it's done on the replace side, and let me just tell you that if you want to delete something, click that gray box and delete on your keyboard. But once it's done here, it goes over and does a suffix and prefix removal. Obviously, suffix at the back end of the word and prefix on the front end. And again, not case sensitive, and don't use punctuation with the word. Okay, that can be true for all three tabs. And what this does is if I have a record called CRM Fusion Company, and then maybe one's in there called CRM Fusion Inc., they will be both evaluated down and seen as just CRM Fusion, because we're ignoring company, we're ignoring Inc. Okay, now they don't have to be listed next to each other like that to work either. We just put them in a logical order as we were entering them. But basically, let's say you've got two suffixes, okay? So CRM Fusion Incorporated Limited. It's going to ignore Incorporated and ignore Limited. Okay. And then it does a similar function, but on the front end. So the CRM Fusion Incorporated can still match to a record that's just called CRM Fusion, because we're ignoring the and ignoring Incorporated, and all we have left is CRM Fusion. In addition to the mapping type, we also have these engines here to the right. We have the fuzzy, which is, well, let's talk about fuzzy last. Let's talk about alpha clean, because I alluded to that in the beginning here when we were talking about the account cleaning list. The alpha clean only looks at English alphabet letters A through Z and numbers 0 through 9. So it ignores foreign characters and punctuation. Okay, and just to show you in help docs, so it's for ASCII data, which includes space and an ampersand. Okay. So if you're thinking, well, there might be some punctuation out there I really just don't need to have evaluated, when we're looking at duplicate data, because really punctuation isn't going to tell you if something's a duplicate or not, when we're talking North American anyway. So that's nice. Just cleans up, maybe somebody got fat fingered with a key or just junk got in there. And then the transpose engine says that the order of the words is irrelevant as long as the words are exactly the same. So if I have a record called Salesforce Foundation and one called Foundation Salesforce, they can still match with the transpose engine turned on. Okay, so it transposes at the word level, not the letter level. Okay, and then fuzzy, this is our phonetic match. It actually does a metaphone. So what it does is it removes the vowels from the word and then analyzes how the consonants sound when the word's pronounced. It also ignores numbers and spaces. Okay, so phonetically, a record called Hewlett-Packard matches to one called Howlett-Pickard, because once you remove those vowels, the phonetics of the leftover consonants still sound the same. So that becomes really helpful for picking up spelling mistakes. Okay, but it's important to remember that it ignores numbers, right? So a lot of times we have people who work with big box stores and part of the account name is that store's number. If you turn on fuzzy, that number will no longer be evaluated during the comparison. Okay, or we have people who work with like Girl Scout troops and they have the troop number, same sort of thing. And oftentimes people think, well, if I turn all these on, that's as loose as I can go, and I'm really going to open it up to find a lot of good matches. That may be true, but it may not be. It's very dependent on your data. So this isn't going to be an exact science for you. Some of it will be trial and error to see what works best. But once you find that niche, you'll be able to work within it really well. And I wouldn't stop trying other options just to see if maybe something new has come in, especially if you hire somebody new. We all have our own nuances on how we enter data. Okay, so as you're looking for duplicates, you have to be a little bit creative and clever with what you are using to do the evaluation, which is why it's important when you're working in here to understand the mapping types or at least know where to reference their definitions. Okay, the next mapping type down is the street address match, and this one is not customizable, but built into it, it'll do things like ignore the road indicator. So 123 Main Street matches to 123 Main Ave. N and North are seen the same, S and South, W and West, and so on. Numbers and their spelled out variation are seen the same. So first in 1ST, 1 and ONE. All right, so that is built into the street address match. And you'll notice if you try to turn on fuzzy, it won't let you. Okay, when we know that fuzzy is just not even a good option, we won't let you turn it on because we're matching on street address, you're matching on numbers. So we need to have those evaluated. But you can turn on alpha clean, which I like. I get a little alpha clean happy just because we can all accidentally hit punctuation and stuff, and this just helps clean it up. Now for billing city, we are choosing to use exact, and exact is 100% exact spelling, spacing, and punctuation, which, for things like city, I think work really well, or email, maybe even website. And there are other mapping types available for email and website, but we all know exact for those sorts of things as an initial pass can work really well. In addition to this, we've turned on the fuzzy, and I'd even turn on the alpha clean again, just to soften it up a bit, not to make the matching so rigid, but to have a little bit of play in how things are evaluated. The billing postal code here, we're using zip 5 and 9, and that is very US centric because it allows for a 5-digit numeric postcode to match to its 9-digit numeric counterpart. If we're talking alphanumeric postcodes anywhere outside the US, it will not corrupt the matches. It essentially just reverts to exact. Okay, but if your data is primarily outside of the US, I would either suggest using the exact mapping type or not matching on postal code. And if you have a really strong mixture of the two, then maybe you should subset down on the first screen and say, okay, for this one, we'll say, let's look at records with the billing country equals USA or whatever you've standardized it to be. And then the next time you run it, you can look for stuff where it's not equal to USA. Okay. So if you're working with data across countries, that might be a good way to handle it. Get things cleaned up within their own countries first and then do a complete database comparison if you need to. All right, for phone, I'm actually going to use numeric. Built into the numeric, it ignores parentheses, hyphens, and alpha characters. So as long as your numbers are in the same order and are the same, you can be seen as a match. One thing I want to point out here is that a lot of times when we import data into Salesforce, we ignore the phone number field. And the phone number field is one of those fields in Salesforce that, unless you have a validation rule on it, it just takes what you give it. So if you're importing phone numbers that are separated with maybe a period, that's going to show up in your Salesforce data. It's not like when you type the phone number in the UI and it sort of auto formats it for you. When you import it, it just, like I said, takes whatever you have in that field in your spreadsheet. Numerically speaking, however, a period is a relevant character, so it will not be ignored. But talking about phone numbers, a period is irrelevant. We really don't need it. It's not noting anything. So if you are concerned that you may have periods in your phone number field, again, we can turn on alpha clean and have those ignored. Okay. Now, I'm going to turn match blank back on here. If you want to add a mapping condition, again, click the add mapping condition at the lower left. Clear mapping clears off the whole thing. So I don't want you to think that if you have one highlighted here and click clear mapping, that it's just taking away that one. That's, if you want to do singular removals, just click the blue box and then delete on your keyboard. All right, so this screen is all about choosing the fields that you want to have match between records, and the mapping type is, how we're going to evaluate it and how strictly you want those to match. Okay, so again, this is an example of a rigid pass for me, and maybe in my semi-rigid pass, I would remove phone, or I'd remove phone and maybe use a different, looser mapping type for one of these fields. Okay, but you'll be surprised how different your results can be by the addition and removal of a field or by the change of a mapping type. So as you're getting used to this, just look at your results, which we're going to do in a minute, and just become acquainted with how it's working with your data. Okay. I'm really stressing the review because there is no restore file for a merge. You won't get one if you merge records within Salesforce. You won't get one if you merge records here. We give you some files at the end that will help, if you need to do a restore, they can help, but it's not a complete restore, okay? Because you've got to remember, when we're merging data, it's not just at the field level, but we're reparenting sub-objects. And that's the real pain point when it comes to restoring data after a merge, is reassociating sub-objects properly. The field level data, that's easy. So that's why when we're talking about doing matches, we say, find those obvious ones first. And it may be a small list, but so be it. You have got good confidence in them. You can clean them up and get them out of the way. And then if you follow that systematic approach, it actually will be more efficient than just saying, at the very least, I need it to match on name and city, and I'm just going to sift through all the different variations that are there. Okay. If you subset it down for yourself, I think you'll find the process go a little bit quicker. Okay, before we move on to the result grid, because there's a whole lot of different stuff we're going to talk about there, I just want to take a pause and see if you guys have questions about anything we discussed on the first screen or this screen or best practices. And I'm actually going to bring up the best practices doc. Okay. So dedupe in the following order, multi-pass strategy. Um, there is a recommendation that name, addresses, and phone fields are standardized prior to looking for dupes. This was, I would say, more true 5 years ago when we didn't have such specialized mapping types. It is still a way to increase effectiveness in finding your matches if you do this. So if you're thinking, well, how do I standardize that stuff? My suggestion would be to use our Mass Impact module. It's a really great tool just to do things like this, standardization, and it can also be scheduled, so that's nice. Okay, I don't see any questions come in, but if we have to jump back to these couple pages or what we talked about here, that's okay. Let's go ahead and move on to step 3. When it's sitting here at 0 out of 100, we're just waiting for Salesforce to pick up the job and start processing. And my computer's been a little bit slow lately, so that could be partially my fault too. Okay, now that I don't know if you saw as the numbers are going by, but it said it was reading about 24,000 records. We have far more than that in our database, but the reason it was only looking at that many was twofold. One, because of the limiting condition I have on screen 1, where I said the state had to be OH, Ohio, or PA. And then also in part because of the fields that I'm matching on. Because remember, it will only look at records where the fields that I'm matching on are populated. Okay, and only look at records where those fields are either blank if the match blank was turned on like we had for phone. So let's take a look at the results that we have, and you can see here the matching is not case sensitive. Had I not turned on match blank for phone, this group would not have been brought back. So if you notice, phone is blank for both records. In the next group down, it's populated in matches on both records. So any groups where you see no phone numbers, they would not have been brought back had we not turned on match blank. Okay, and obviously groups can be 2 or more. All right, there's no limit. If there's 30 of them that match based on your matching techniques, and that's how many you can find and merge into one. We have the owner name here, and it's highlighted in green just as a quick visual indicator to you to let you know that the person who owns this record is an active user in your Salesforce org. If they were highlighted in red, which I'm not sure, oh, here we go. That means that this person is no longer active. Okay, and some people like that just so they can say, oh, well, I know my record's owned by somebody inactive. Let me go ahead and change that. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do that here in the grid. I just want to point out a couple different matches because of the mapping types. So let me just take a look at the data. I was looking for, oh, zip 5 and 9. So this is a good example, as is this. 5-digit zip code matching to its 9-digit counterpart. RDD Enterprises, OH, and RDD Enterprises. Those matched because of the phonetic matching, okay, because of the fuzzy that I turned on. Okay, North State Route 589, End State Route 589, one's spelled out, one's not. So you can see with the street address mapping type, we were able to match those. Okay. Now each record in a group, well, each group needs a record to be the master. And there are 3 different ways of telling the system which record should be the master. So let's talk about what the master record means first. When something is selected as the master, and we'll just pretend in this situation that it's the top record, that record means that we're keeping the field level values from here, even as we merge it with this other record. Okay, so the account name would still look like capital A, lowercase bb. The owner would still be Ashley. Kelly would lose her ownership as her record gets absorbed into Ashley's. And any other fields that are going on this record, that's the value that we would retain is what is on the master. Okay, that's at the barest bones of what a master record is. We have some things put in place here, though, that you can turn on or off based on whatever you want that can be exceptions to that. So on the right-hand side, we have update fields where master is empty. Now, of course, we're not looking at every single field that we have on these records. That would just make this page huge. We're looking at the ones that are of the utmost importance. But you might be thinking to yourself, well, if one of my fields on the master record is blank, but there's a value on the record that's being merged into it, I would like to keep that value from the subordinate record and push it up to the master. That is going to happen by default because of the update fields where master is empty option. So again, it ensures that if a master record is blank on a field, but the subordinate record has a value, that value on the subordinate record will be merged up to the master in an effort to keep the most information possible. The default behavior is that it's turned on for all fields, but of course you can turn this on and off based on your needs per field. The other exception is combined field values. And this applies to the field types you see here: text area, Boolean, which is like true-false fields, and multi-select. So those are the fields that you'll see populated here. And let's talk about Boolean fields first, this true-false stuff. Those are not accommodated for in the update fields where master is empty, because the checkbox field, a true-false field, is never empty. An unchecked means false, so that's the value, it's not empty, and checked obviously means true. Those fields are specifically handled here under combined field values. So if I said, yeah, check off all my Boolean fields, I can see which ones fit that profile. And what that means is when I have a field checked here that is Boolean, it ensures that a true value is retained if one exists, even if that true value isn't on the selected master. Let me try to say it a different way. Where there are two records and they are both marked as true, it's going to stay true regardless. If they're both marked as false, they'll stay false. If one is true and one is false, and you want to ensure that the true value is retained, but you don't want that true value to dictate which record is chosen as the master, you can choose to have it selected in the combined field values and trust that this setting now ensures that, okay, we're going to look for this field in every group that we merge. And if one of those records shows it as true, we're going to keep that true value on the master. Text areas, it also includes long text area. It allows you to concatenate the value from the master with what's on the subordinate. And it will separate the different values by default of a carriage return or a line feed, or you can use a custom separator like a semicolon or some custom text. For multi-select pick lists, this ensures that the selected value on the master and the subordinate are both retained. Okay, so we have a field, and let me pull this in. I'm going to click Show More Fields down here. We have a field called Product of Interest. When I add an extra field, it brings it over here to the right. And those are all. Here we go. So when I merge these together, it's going to say, all right, demand tools and Duplocker are here, people import is here, and easy dedupe. So after all these are merged together, the products of interest multi-select pick list will have demand tools, Duplocker, easy dedupe, and people import on the selected side, because it's combining all of the different values from that field. Okay, we have a question. Let me just explain this now. So they're saying if there's time with an N, can you explain the true false field value again? And let's do it now because you might not be the only one who has that question. All right. Let me pull in a true false field. Let me see which ones we have here. Master. Okay. I'm going to bring it in. We'll bring in master. Okay. So right now, this is a checkbox true false field, and they're both false. So even if I have master selected here, it means, and gosh, that's a bad field to use because of what it's called. This has nothing to do with the master record. This is just a field that we have called master. But for that field, both values are false. Whether it's checked here or not, the value is always going to stay false because that's all that's available, okay? Whereas in this one, we'll make this true. Let's say that this bottom record is the master, the one that you see highlighted, and this one here that I now have highlighted is the subordinate. Because I have my field, master, selected in combined field values, it says even though this record is the master and the value for the master field is false, this field is marked as true. And we know that when it's selected here, that if we see a true value, that's what should be pushed over onto the master record. Okay, so even though I didn't choose my master because it had the true value, this record was the master, it's still going to say, well, we're keeping that true value because that's important to have. Okay, so does that make more sense, or are you still unclear? And if you're still unclear, we'll take it offline. Okay, so these two options, update fields or master as empty and combine field values, are all ways for you to tell the system to, absorb the most data that we can from each record being merged. Now let's talk about the three different ways of selecting a master. The first one is really simple. Do you see these pins here? If I'm looking at this and say, all right, I want this top one to be the master, I double click the pin. The pin turns green, the other one turn red, and they each get a check in their checkbox. So green means master, red means subordinate. And again, we know what the master means. We're keeping the field level values from this record, and our exceptions to that are listed here for update fields or master as empty and combine field values. The second way of choosing a master, I'm going to show you the first two ways that are manual, and then we'll look at the more en masse way. Every group has this duplicate key above it, okay? And if I right-click on that duplicate key and choose Set Up Custom Merge, that gives me a pop-up interface and allows me to have a better view at all the fields for the two records or however many are in that group. This gives me a more granular approach at which data is kept because I can pick and choose from each field. So this record here is still listed as the quote-unquote master record, and that's just so we know which ID to keep during the merge. But if I wanted this one to be the master, I could just double-click and make that one the master. The field levels, anything that's highlighted in yellow, is what will be retained, okay? To discern if what you're keeping is different than what's on this record over here, look at the color of the ink. So if it's green, it means that the selected value that we have is the same as the value over here. If it is red, it means that it's different than what's here. Okay, so if I was like, oh, I want to keep false for do not solicit, they do want to get our emails. So everything you do here in the custom merge trumps the update fields and combine field values. The default will set it up this way based on your settings here, but you can start manipulating it and change it, and whatever you end up setting after you click accept is how it's going to be. And you can see when you're doing a custom merge, the pins will turn blue and still get a check in their checkbox. But I can't look at either of these and say, oh, this one's the master, because it's a mixture between the two. So I'd have to go back into my setup custom merge and take a look at what is being kept. All populated fields are brought to the top, so you don't have to scroll down looking for them. Okay, and mine, if your pins are just blue without this paper clip, that's normal. Mine, I just turned on um, the colorblind option. So under Edit and Options, you have Use Alternate Icons for Single Table Dedupe. And I am not colorblind. However, I do like these icons a bit better. Rather than just colors, I like the check and the X and the paperclip. So if you want to turn those on, you can. All right, before we move into talking about master rules, because that's a little bit of a beast of its own, do we have any lingering questions about what a master record is, the two manual ways of choosing a master record, or the update fields or combined field values? I'll give you guys a minute. And really, if you have questions, please ask them. I'm more than happy to re-explain something. You know, some days I explain things better than others. It's just, I guess that's how my brain works. So if I'm not using the verbiage that clicks with your brain, we'll try again. And somebody asked if I could slow down, so I tried to ease the pace up a little bit. I hope this is a bit better, at least giving you some pauses to make some notes. Okay, I'm going to assume that everybody's clear since I don't have any questions coming in, but if you're not, please, please, please tell me. I want to make sure you guys walk away here confident to use this tool, because this is, like I said, one of the modules where you don't get a restore file. So I want you to feel sure of yourself when you come in here and you're looking at the data. And it will take a couple runs on your own. It's always very different watching somebody else who knows the system inside and out work with it than when you sit down by yourself and work with it. So give yourself a break on that end, and you know, don't be afraid to play with it a little bit. Okay, so the first two ways of selecting a master were very manual, and those are fine, and that's, you know, good when you need to have a little bit more control over what's being selected. But typically on a rigid merge, like we're doing now, you can employ the use of master rules. And this allows you to put forth a set of criteria to say, if the record fits these criteria, I want you to choose it as a master. And you get to give each criteria a point system. So you can weight their order of importance for the selection of the master. We have some pre-built rules, of course, you can use as they are, and of course you can modify them, and you can build your own. So let's just build our own by clicking New Rule. And you can name the rule, so we'll just call this Training March. Oops. And then what we want you to do here is add the condition and tell us how you want the record to be chosen as the master. You will have access to all of your standard and custom fields. And you'll also have this little field at the top called record. You get some really cool constraints here that would probably simplify a few things. So if you're thinking, I want the newest record, how the heck do I say newest record, right? Can you go by created date, or, and typically that's where people want to go. But you want to go here to record, and then the constraint that we have is newest. So built in, we've programmed it to look at the created date and seek out the one that was created most, created most recently. Sometimes a constraint is also sufficient for the value, and this is one of those situations. So the record that's the newest, we're going to give it a score of 10. So if it's not the newest, it gets a 0. But that might not be the only thing I want to evaluate on. That's where I want to start, is to choose the master as the newest, but I also want to ensure that the last activity date was the newest or most recent. We'll do last activity date. And then again, we've got some constraints in here. Newest, older than 90 days, 60, 30 days. Okay. Or you can say oldest. I'm going to say newest because to me, if you have an activity on there, which is task or event, then you're probably working with that record. You know, maybe more so than its duplicate. I'm not going to weight it as importantly as the newest record. I'm going to give it a score of 9. So what happens here is this becomes a cumulative score. If the record is the newest, it gets a score of 10. If it also is a record that has the newest last activity date, it'll add a score of 9, so that record will equal out to 19. Okay. You can have a lot of levels of conditions here, and I've seen people go a little bit crazy, but it gets to the point where, they can successfully choose the master and feel comfortable with it. Again, this is the basics class, so we're not going to talk about field rules, but field rules are they're so good for, just getting a little bit more granular. I know I keep using that term, but granular on an automated basis, not so much the custom merge manual basis. So once you feel comfortable in here and you want to dive into those advanced concepts, I think field rules will make a light of difference. Because here we're selecting the record. With the field rules, you get to say, okay, yeah, we're keeping that record, but for this field, I want to keep it from the oldest record, or I want to keep it this field if it's the most common value that's used in my duplicate. So just to give you a preview, you get far more detailed with what data you keep. Okay, so for the master rule, let's save this. And there's another element here we're going to talk about in a minute, but I just want you to see how it works like this. I'm going to save the rule, and it shows up here in my list, and this is the one checked off. Now, if I click apply rule to all, which you do down here, which I know it's sort of weird because you got your master rule here, then the application of it is this button here. But if I click apply rule to all, it will overwrite my manual selection. I want you to be aware of that because a lot of times people come in here, do a whole bunch of manual selection, and then they think, well, I'll apply master rule to take care of the rest. And they apply it to everything and they wipe out their custom settings. So when you apply the master rule, if you have custom ones set up or manual ones, you can say, okay, let's just apply it to the unchecked. Because if you'll notice, these are not checked, these are. Okay, when I do that, so these don't have a score because I did those manually, but these guys, they do. So this one was the newest record. Neither of them had an activity date. When I'm creating a master rule, though, I like to pull in the fields that that master rule is dependent upon. So again, I click Show More Fields. I'm going to do last activity date and created date. And they'll be stuck over here on the right. Oops, I don't think I grabbed created date. These checkboxes are very, oh, I did do created date. Where's that? Oh, there it is. All right, I'm going to move this over here. Just so as I'm looking at the values, I can quickly see my fields here. And if this starts to get smushed up, guys, click the Show Grid Horizontal scroll. And as you expand the field, which if you give a double click at that arrow, okay, you're going to see a scroll bar up here at the bottom. You get a bit more real estate on your screen. Okay, so these guys up here don't matter, but this one, okay, this is down to the millisecond, so this was brought in a batch process. This one here is a little bit clearer. This is the newest record, 10 years newer, and neither of them had an activity date, which is why neither of them had that extra added score of the 9. This one is oldest, but it had a newest activity date, so it got a 9. This one is the newest record, so it got a 10, and that's why it chose that one as the master. All right, and I also bring those in just as checks and balances to make sure that I set my rule up the way I wanted it to function, and that it's actually functioning the way it should. When you pull fields in, once you're done with them, you can drag them off the grid and get rid of them. Now, let me see if I have any that tie. Well, here, we'll do this. I'm going to edit this rule, okay? And there's another option called the Use Score Delta. And when I turn that on, it's saying we're only going to choose a master record if the value or the score of the record is different by a value of 1 from the other records in the group. So in other words, if they tie, no master will be selected. This is optional, of course, and you can change the score delta to fit your scoring up here. It doesn't have to be 1 or 2. It just depends on the values that you're using. And these numbers are arbitrary, right? You can use 1, 2, 99, and 100. It doesn't matter. However the scoring works for you, use those numbers. So let me save this and then show you Now, in this situation, I cannot say apply rule to unchecked or checked because they're all checked. So I might say, well, all right, that wasn't the right rule. I'm going to merge my manual stuff first. And for me, it's easy because they're right here. So I can right click and merge that group individually. Or typically what I like to do, if I have gone in and done some manual selections first, I merge that process, and then when it's done, it keeps me in this grid and shows me everything else that needed to be tended to that didn't have a master selected. I only apply it to the unchecked if I'm 100% certain about the rule I'm going to use, okay? So just keep that in mind when you have the manual selection. For this one, I'm going to say apply rule to all just for ease of use, and it did that. And now here, I'm going to say show unchecked. And there was nothing that was unchecked. So what that means to me is nothing tied because everything had a master. If something had tied, so let's say they have the same created date, or they both, had the same created date and same last activity date, and they both equaled 10, 9, or 19. Because of my square delta being 1, no master would have been selected. So let me try a different one. Let's look at this rule. This is the most opportunities in contact. Okay, and you can tell we're using a different scoring system here. The record that has the most associated ops gets a score of 50. The record that has the most associated contacts gets a score of 49. And then, of course, the cumulative would be 99. So that one's selected. I'm going to apply that to all. And this one's going to take just a little bit longer because it's counting up sub-objects. The cool thing when you count up sub-objects in your master rules, though, is that it gives you, in the show more fields, the calculated amounts that it came up with. So if you wanted to see how many opportunities and contacts were associated, and jumped over here, we give you that count, which is kind of nice. But let's go back to the master rule portion, and do you see how these all tied at 99 and no master is selected? That's because we had the score delta turned on, because it's not different by a value of 1, so no master will be taken. So we can say, all right, show me all my unchecked. And you can either choose to apply a different rule to it. So maybe this one I'm going to say, oh, just the newest record. And I say apply rule to unchecked. And then now the reason this went away and went blank is because my display here says show unchecked. I've got to take it back to show all because now they're all checked. Okay, but I can have the application of 2 different rules here because of that. Sometimes I may be looking at a record and think, well, that rule's fine, but I actually want to do a custom merge. So I can trump that rule by doing my own custom merge in here. Okay, so the scoring here is just stuck because the master rule had been applied, but what we're looking at now to discern master is from the custom merge. Or if I decide, oh, if I don't like how it shows that one, I'm just going to double click this one. That again is overriding what the master rule had done. Okay, so let's take a bit of a pause. Questions on anything we've covered so far, all the way back to the beginning of where we started. Okay, I see one coming here. If records are merged, are the deleted records in the recycling bin? Good question. And that's sort of segueing into where we're going to go next with some of this stuff. The short answer is yes. Okay. Let's go down to that option. Okay, so you see here under options, I'm sort of hovering around with my mouse. The default behavior is when you merge a record that the subordinate record, after we take from it the field level values that we can, and after we reparent the sub-object, that skeletal remains of the record is deleted and put in your recycle bin. You have the ability to change this, so this is the default behavior. But if you would prefer, some people say, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to merge these. I just don't want it to take that final step of deleting the skeletal remains of my subordinate record. So they choose to prefix a particular field, and the default is the name field with the verbiage delete triple star. So it still does the same movement of data. It just, like I said, doesn't take that final step of deleting the subordinate record. There's two trains of thought on this. Some people think, well, it's just leaving junk in your data, and that's where I'm at. I think it's just leaving a whole bunch of junk that you have to go clean up. Other people think, well, I may have to do a restore in my data, and having the record ID still exist in my database will make that restore easier, which is true, but my advice would be if you're not sure about doing a merge, don't do it. You're far better off, and it's far easier to clean up duplicate data than it is to unmerge data that had been inaccurately combined. Okay. But the option is there, so use it at will. If you're comfortable with that approach, then that works for you. Just for me, I prefer to just know going in when this stuff is merged that yes, this is what I want to do, and have no questions. We don't always have that luxury though. Okay, another good question. What do we do if we decide that one of the accounts is not a duplicate and we don't want it to merge? So I'm going to assume that you mean like in a group like this where you have multiple records. It's not just these two. Let's say you wanted to merge the first three together. Cool. Okay, good. I'm on the same page with you then. To ignore others in the group, you just uncheck their checkbox. They're still going to have that colored pin, but that's just a visual indicator for you so you know which record to expect to be kept as the master. But as long as your master record is selected and at least one subordinate, this group will merge, and these two records that are unchecked will still exist in the system on their own. Okay, because what we're doing here is we're showing you how the data is grouped together based on the matching you set up in step 2. So it's not like an all or nothing once you get the result. You do have the control. And if you're thinking, you know what, I want to merge every group in this result except for this one, just uncheck it. Okay. There's a couple other options here. Let's just talk through these. They're not real labor intensive with detail here. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the grid. The Use Salesforce Merge. This is checked by default for leads, accounts, and contacts, and we do recommend that it stay checked when you're merging those objects. It becomes unavailable when you do other objects like opportunities and custom objects. So what this is saying is, yes, we're going to call in the Salesforce merge code when merging that object, and that really helps ensure that the related list items gets reparented, archived activities are moved over. It's a more seamless move of data. We had to put in our own merge code to accommodate for non-standard and custom objects. So when this is unchecked or unavailable, we give you a link of the caveats that will apply when functioning that way. Which of course you have to do if you're doing something outside of accounts, contacts, and leads. But when you're using those 3 objects, we really do recommend that you have it checked. So just to give you an overview at the top here, when it is unchecked or unavailable, the merge time is a bit longer, uses more API calls. Archived completed activities, those are moved if they're less than a year old. Yeah, it says down here, moved if they're less than a year old. But then after it's archived, which Salesforce will do when it's been completed after a year, those aren't accessible through the API and then through demand tools. Now, there has been some changes, and yes, archived activities are now accessible through the API, but in the merge code, they're not. So in other areas it is, but in the merge it is not. Okay. So a couple other things down there. again, it becomes more prevalent if you're using non-standard or custom objects, and if you are confused about any of this or concerned, as you're reading through it about what happens to your data, you can always shoot us off a question and we'll let you know. Now the merge batch size, it even says in our help doc, this is trial and error. This is a way for us to help communicate with the Salesforce servers and push the data in to the Salesforce servers in more manageable chunks. The merge batch size of 5, it should be fine for everybody, but once you start getting over 2,000 groups, so look over here on the bottom left. Once this group number starts pushing over 2,000, you may want to increase this to maybe 10. Okay, if we're looking at maybe 50,000 groups, I might put it up to 15 or 20. It basically takes the one large group of data that we have and breaks it down into that many subgroups, so it's not stressing out the API, so it starts processing things a bit faster. Okay, so on the lower left, just so you can see here, it's telling us we have a total of 611 accounts in this grid, individual accounts. Should we merge all of them, we'll be left with 262 because that's how many groups they've been placed into. The reassign to master owner is an optional feature. It allows you to reassign sub-objects to be owned by whomever is going to own the master record. So let's look at this group here. Mark owns a record, Lori owns a record. Mark owns the master. If I had open cases selected here, it would indicate that any open cases on Mark's record and Lori's record, when this is being merged, will now be owned by Mark. So reassign the sub-object's ownership to match the master record ownership in that group. In this group down, Lori would absorb ownership. Again, completely optional. We do have other tools that will facilitate record reassignments. Some people just like to get it done in one fell swoop. Okay, the extra field logging and this stuff we're going to talk about in a second. I just want to direct you back to the grid here for a minute. I had mentioned earlier that you can change the ownership. And what I want to say is that you can inline edit pretty much any field except for system fields in this grid, and they are real-time inline edits. So let's say I want to change the record ownership here. I can double click and say, you know what, Michelle should be owning that one, and when I click update value in Salesforce, that is a real-time change. My grid will refresh here. There it goes. So if I click my icon here, it's going to launch me out to the record in Salesforce, and we're going to see that Michelle is now the owner. And if you have your history tracking turned on for that field, which I don't, nope, it would have shown. Okay, so if you make the change there and you have it set up to be tracked in account history, it'll show, but since we don't have that set up, for me, it's not showing. Okay, but it shows up in the chatter feed. So I can do that for, double clicking a field, or let's say, let me find a bigger group here. Let's say I want to make a change to all the records in a group. Okay, and I don't want to have to double click on each one. You can right click, and of course you can copy. You can do update value in Salesforce, which is just like double clicking. Update group rows means we're going to make this change for every record in the group. So if I change this from Lincoln Way to Lincoln Parkway, all of them are going to change. Okay, but if I did update value, that's just like the double click of one record. Now I could do copy and then paste. So Control V and C work here. Okay. So those are some real-time edits you can do in the grid, which is nice because sometimes, when you're looking at your data and you're merging it, but you're like, oh, I really need to change that. It should just be fixed before I merge. You have the flexibility to do that. The other thing you have is a find capability. So people often are like, well, I have this huge group and I don't know if this one record is in there and I can't really find it. It appears that the data is sorted alphabetically, but it is not. It is sorted based on the duplicate key, which depending on how you match data, it could be alphabetical, but it's not a reliable, we can't always say, yes, your duplicates are sorted alphabetically. So what we have is if you right click on a column header, you can find in that column. So if I'm like, all right, I'm looking for my Youngstown record. There we go, Youngstown Christian, Youngstown lithograph, university. So it just makes it a lot easier for me to navigate through my grid. All right, I'm going to take another breath here for you guys and see if you have any questions. And you guys don't have to wait for me to ask if there's questions. You can pump them in as they're coming to you. So, you know, if it's jumping ahead or moving behind, I can accommodate and just answer it when it's appropriate. All right, let's keep going. I also want you to be aware that, oh, I spoke too soon, sorry. We are editing data that is already in Salesforce. Is it possible to use demand tools to do this before you upload the data? Kind of. So you can, upon an import, you can use Mass Effect to do your import. Pardon, there's a call coming in. I didn't want it to break up what I was saying to you. So yes, you can use Mass Effect to do an import. And there are some formulas that you apply to the data upon import to, you know, make sure things are formatted correctly for state, country, phone, making sure things are proper case to where you don't have to do your spreadsheet beforehand. But you can't actually do it in a demand tools module before it's in the system. The data that we're reading when you see it in grids like this is from Salesforce. Okay, but you can do it at the point of upload, just not before upload. You're welcome. Okay. Are there any other questions? No. You also have the option of exporting your grid data. So you can do it as formatted, as a data file, and you can do a non-master and master file. So formatted Excel looks just like the grid, but let me get an export. So do formatted. Okay, looks just like the grid. Now, what you're not seeing is the color-coded pins, but those are housed here. When you see 28 and 29, 28 is the master, 29 is the subordinate. 30 denotes a custom merge, like when you right-click and did custom merge and the pins are blue. Okay, so that's, I don't know why the numbers are the way they are. They've been that way since the inception of the tool, so it must be something in SQL that does it, but that's what those mean. So 28 is the master, 29 are subordinate. And if you look at it, it sort of makes a little bit of sense because you can't ever denote two masters, but you can have multiple subordinates. Okay, so that looks just like the grid. And then if you do data file, it's just raw data. There's no formatting that's going in here. It's just a whole bunch of records, and they're not even in their groups. To group them back together, or at least to get the records next to each other that were duplicates, you have to sort by your duplicate key. So we sort by that group, and then you'll see how the duplicate keys start looking the same. And that's how we see the groups. Now, depending on what you have to do with the data, this might be an easier use of the file, but just so you know how to work with it. And then the master, non-master only works if you have masters and non-masters selected here. And all this gives is the ID of the master record and the ID of the subordinate record. Now, if we sort by the master ID, well, column A, there we go. So the sorting here, if I'm trying to find a group, here we go. This master doesn't mean that there's a ton of these records. It's still one record, but these are all the subordinates for that master. So all of these records would get merged into this one. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at one of these and what they look like when you actually execute the merge. So these icons here, and I showed you this earlier, but they launch you out to the record in Salesforce. If yours doesn't do that, if it brings up an HTML black and white type view, go to Edit and Options and have Use Salesforce to View Objects selected. Okay, that ensures that when you click the View button or a View icon, it launches you to the record in the Salesforce UI. So we're going to merge these two. I'll open that one. I'll open this one. So this is my master. This is my subordinate. And I can't click Merge Check Records. If I click that on the lower right, it's going to merge everything that has a check in its checkbox. Okay, so that's the key, is it has to have a check in its checkbox in order to be merged. It doesn't have to have a colored pin. So if all of these are checked with no colored pin, it would look to the selected master rule to find a master. Okay, but since I just want to do this one group, I'll right click and just merge the group. Tells me I'm going to do this immediately. There's no restore files being created. So if I accidentally right click and choose that, or if I accidentally click merge check records, I still get this pop up to back out of the process. Okay, 2 accounts are merged into one, 0 errors, and here's my log file. Everybody gets 1 log file per day. It does build on itself, so the most recent processes will be at the bottom. And it's saved by default under your documents in a Demand Tools data folder in a log file folder. And so these are the changes I was doing before, right? I changed my field to true. I changed my billing field. This is my merge that I just did. So this ID merged with this ID, no errors to report, so it's a pretty simple log file. In my log file, yes, I get the IDs, but if I wanted another field, let's say you have like an account number field or a DUNS number field or just something that's really important that you want reported places because you use it as a point of reference. Over here on the right, the extra field logging, you can say, you know what, oh, let me close that. Instead of just giving me the IDs, give me the IDs and this field in my spreadsheet. Okay, so if I were to merge this one, and I'm going to show you what those merge records look like in Salesforce. I just wanted to show you this extra field logging. But that will add that field into your results, or not your results, it'll add it into your log file. There are other files that are spit out as well, and that will be placed in those files too. Why is this taking so long? All right, well, that's taking its time. Of course, there we go. Now let's look at the log file here. Let me reopen it. Okay, see how I said the extra field logging should bring in the city field from both records? Now I see Cincinnati, Cincinnati, because of this extra field logging. Let's look here. So this was our master, and this was our subordinate. It doesn't look like there's any related list items there to move over. But if I refresh this, it's going to say it was deleted, because that's what happens when you do a merge. It deletes the subordinate, and that's now in my recycle bin. This guy, oh, there it is, my bad. I did AM Kinney, but this is the one. This was my master, so let me refresh that. And really what we're looking at is the last modified, because I did the merge. Okay, and you can see here that the account was merged with another record. It doesn't tell you which record, but that it was merged. You have the option of creating a summary task, a summary email, and a task per merge for each executed merge. And you can assign it to the master owner, so whoever owns the master record, or to the current user, which is me, because I'm the current user of the system. So let's do these two. And we'll merge that. Okay, 0 errors, great. That was my subordinate, so that's gone. Let's refresh my master. And in my activity history, I have this task. So records merge, it gives you the ID that it was merged with and who owned it and that extra field logging field. Okay, so you know exactly which ID is now gone from your system because it was absorbed by this record. Just check the questions here. All right. Oh, and you know, we should take a look and show you that the activity was owned by me because I chose current user. Okay, and you can see that Lori's the owner. Had I chose record owner, it would have been her as the owner of the activity. Now, after you have all these settings put in place, you're probably not going to want to come back in here and recreate the wheel. So we like to save our scenarios. And you can save them at any point in the game. Even if I have my settings here and I go back to step 2, I can save this scenario and it's still going to remember what's here. But I always like to do it on screen 3. And since I started with a pre-built, it's going to try to overwrite this scenario with the new settings, which I can do, or I can just call it something new. And then it asks me here, okay, do I want to make any notes? Well, I want to change the name. And yes, that selection of records. So this is pulling from my criteria on screen 1, so I don't want to mess with that. This one is pulling from my criteria on screen 2. I really don't want to do anything there. The only thing I might add for my peace of mind is I might put MB for match blank. Okay. But all this other stuff is pulled from what the system settings are. For whatever reason, it doesn't show you which records are selected as match blank, but I like to have that in there. And then you can click OK, and it'll be saved back in your pre-built list on screen 1. All right, let's see. Could you get through part of your records and then save and come back to finish reviewing and merging them? Yes, you could, but that would imply that you're leaving demand tools open. You're not navigating away from this page at all, which also means you're not losing connectivity to the internet. You're not losing connectivity to Salesforce. So it can be done, not really something I would recommend. What I would say is, if you got through part of it, go ahead and merge those, because the rest of the stuff that you didn't get through is going to stay there anyway. And even if you reran that same scenario, those records that you didn't get to are going to come back to you, because this is a constant pull in real time. When you go from step 2 to step 3, it's in real time reading the data in Salesforce. So I think you'd actually be a bit better served if you just executed the merge on the ones you had done and then reran the scenario or just came back to your grid to get the remainder. Okay, so can I talk a bit about what happens if a merge comes back with an error? It's hard to address because the errors can be so different based on everybody's system. If it comes back with an error, they haven't been merged, I can tell you that. And that could happen because of a validation rule not being met, or maybe a trigger not being optimized for batch processing, you not having sufficient rights to every record, or somehow not having the delete permission. So there's a lot of different errors that can come back, and at that point, you'll see it in the log file. And if you don't know what that means, your best bet is to send us over the log file in a case and say, I'm not really sure what that error message means. Now, oh, you're welcome. Hopefully, sooner than later, we will have a community forum where you guys can, self-help with each other and say, hey, I experienced this when I was doing this execution, and that sort of collaboration and camaraderie amongst users, I find helps really get down to the nitty-gritty of those error messages, because sometimes you just don't want to wait for us to respond, which we're pretty quick, but sometimes you can get it quicker. Okay, let's look at some of the files that are spit out when you do this. Okay, so you got some results files. You get the merge record file, the dedupe merge data file, non-master owner change, and the sub-object owner change. These are spit out for you. We don't care what you do with them once we're giving them to you. You can rename them, you can move them, you can delete them. So the merge record file looks like this, where if you merge it, it tells you the merge time, the object, the master record ID, who owned that, the merged record ID, the ID of the person who owned that, and then the extra field logging data that you might have done, like I did with my city. The dedupe merge data file gives you all the field level values, including the record ID from the records in the result grid. Okay, so this can be helpful if you do have to do a restore to get those field level values back in place. That's what this can help facilitate. The non-master owner change, this file will only populate if you're merging records where the owners are different. And the reason we have this is because if somebody needs to still maybe have access to a record but doesn't because they're not the owner, they can use this file to add that non-master owner to or the merged owner to the account team on the new master. Okay, so they can still have access. And the sub-object owner change file is if the reassigned master owner is done and you have basically a restore file for their ownership. So if you need to reverse the ownership changes, you can do that here. Okay, so it's helpful to know that you get some of those resources and what might be showing up under that demand tools data folder. And that is the detail behind the single table dedupe. Okay, so we can look at this for another object, which we have time to do. So I think I'm going to take a look at contacts because there's a little nuance there that I want you to be aware of. But before we go there, I just, again, want to take a little breather and see if you guys have any questions about anything. It doesn't have to be, something we just talked about, but even if we have to go right back to the beginning. And actually, let's do that. Let's go back to the beginning and I'll show you where that saved scenario is. And there it is. All right, so let's just take a look real quick at contacts. I'm going to click clear scenario. You don't have to do that to load another scenario. I just like to clean the slate. And with contacts, you're going to see two sets of pre-built scenarios, one that says between accounts and one that says within an account. We recommend that you run your contact dedupe first within an account, and then if you want, do between accounts. The difference is within an account ensures that contact duplicates are only found if those contacts exist under the same account ID. The between accounts means that we're finding contact duplicates without any regard to the account that they are associated with. They could be on the same account, they could be on different accounts. So within an account, you know that you're matching records under the same account. Kind of like the merge contacts button in Salesforce that you see. You're only going to see contacts that show up under that account that you're on. The between accounts, like I said, doesn't take into consideration the account data at all unless you tell it to. And it's possible for a John Smith at HP to match to a John Smith at IBM, just depending on what you're matching on. So if you look at the fields to match, when we do within an account, you're always going to have this account ID as an exact match. All right, so that's how we ensure that you're under the same account. On a between account, you'll notice that we don't match on any account level field. We're just looking at the person. Okay, but it is possible. So if you're like, well, they don't necessarily have to be under the same account ID, but maybe I want their account name to be similar. So I can employ, that clean account name mapping type. Now, again, they could be under the same account or they could be under different accounts. I wouldn't foresee you needing to do this unless you hadn't deduped your accounts first. The benefit of deduping your accounts before your contact is not only the top-down approach, but because you're combining related list items, it makes finding the duplicate contacts far easier after accounts have been merged because they most of the time will have that extra parameter of the account ID in common. Let's see, we got a question. Access the recorded webinar. You can log a case. And so from the Today page, you click Tech Support. You can log a case here or go to our website under Support and do Log a Case. And the case reason is recorded webinar. Okay, and then just tell us, which one you're looking for. That's another one of those things that sooner than later, we're going to have a place where you can just go to grab those. You don't have to ask us for them. So that'll, you don't have to have even attended the training or whatever. You can just go out there and peruse the training sessions that are there and view at your leisure. All good things to come. Okay. What other questions can I ask before we start looking at some other details of this? We have about 20 minutes left. And, I know some people after this amount of time start to get inundated with details. So if you're thinking, I got the gist of it, I need to go in there and work and play around, that's fine. I do just want to take a moment to say thank you for joining today. I hope it was easy to follow and helpful. If you have any feedback for us, you will be getting a survey after this training. This is something new we're starting. We get a lot of good feedback from people, but we want them to be able to provide it in a way where they feel less like they're exposed. So if there's something you didn't like or, you can always put it on that survey, or if you loved it, you can put it on the survey. Of course, if you have any product feature requests or ideas, you can log those as a case and we'll get those routed to product management. All right, we have another question here. Nonprofit development question. This is going to be tricky. Is the right tool to use to change, or is this the right tool to use to change the primary contact of an account to a particular contact when there are several with shared addresses, that we want the primary contact to be the one with the largest giving history? No, this is for merging. So unless you plan on merging those records, no. If you want to change the primary contact, I'm not sure how you guys do that, and because I don't know which org setup you have. If you have the nonprofit service pack, or if you're using, I think it's what, Convio, Common Ground. So there's most likely just the account contact table relationship there. So nonprofit service pack. So that almost functions like person accounts, I think, or household. No, this wouldn't be where you do it, because unless you're merging, you're not going to do it in a single table dedupe. For you, you would probably want to use, depending on the data, probably Mass Effect to change that, or you could use Power Grid. So, but no, this wouldn't be the proper place. No problem. All right, how to automate the system, keep the specific value in a field when merging, instead always select master record values. How to automate the system to keep specific value in the field when merging, instead always select. So do you want to keep what's on the master, or are you saying I just want this value to be in this field? Because if you want to specify a value, you're going to have to inline edit like we showed in the grid. Otherwise, during the merge, it's either going to keep the master, or if you use field rules, which again, that's not something we covered today because it's in the advanced concepts class. If you use field rules, you could say, for this field, I always want the largest value kept if it's a number field, or I want the newest value kept, or the oldest, or the average, or the one most commonly used. So you have that flexibility on the field rules. So I think that might be what you want to look into. And if I'm not clear on your question, you can log a case and we can take that offline. Oh, got it. Okay, good. Okay, I was just pausing to see if anything else is going to pop up. Seems like every time I'm like, okay, no more questions, something else pops up, which is fine. I just don't want to interrupt anybody. Okay, also, we have this show portal users. Do we have that in the help bubble here? I don't think so. But if you have the portal users, it'll show it in the grid. Okay, whereas if you don't check that, it won't. But don't forget, these icons, while they're numbered and it is trying to tell you, let's go in this order, you don't necessarily have to, right? Because we're going 1, 2, and I don't even see 3. Where is 3 though? Oh, there it is. 3 being here seems odd to me, because you're either going to start from scratch as 1, and this is like 1A, 1B. Either you can start from scratch, or you can start by loading a scenario. So don't get too caught up on the actual numbers. I wish they were just question marks. But if somebody's getting started, this does sort of step them through the process. Just keep in mind that they give you little blurbs of information. They give you links to the help doc. You can see here, we've got question marks instead of numbers. So we tried to do a nice mixture of the two, but the 1 and 3 tend to throw people a little bit, especially newer users. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. I showed, an example with accounts. Let me show you just what the results will look like within an account for contacts. And I want to just point out here too, there's a first name mapping type, which is beneficial to be used when matching on first name, whether it be lead or contact. And that first name mapping type references the nickname list. Okay, so it'll basically say if somebody is called Tom Smith, but a duplicate record is called Thomas Smith, Tom and Thomas can be seen the same. So you have the nickname on the left and the long name on the right. And you'll have an open space at the bottom to add to it, always. And if you want to get rid of anything, you can do that by clicking the box to the left and delete on your keyboard. Okay, so let's look at the results here. And within an account, like I said, you rest assured that the contacts in the group exist under the same account ID. And with the between accounts, it could happen, but it's not guaranteed. Okay, and you'll notice that the combined field values, the update fields where master is empty, those all stay the same. They just switch for the fields for the object that we're working with. But those options still mean the same thing regardless of which object you're working with. Okay, so if I pulled in the account ID, you can see that they're the same in each group. Well, these are the same for all of these groups, but here we go. Okay. All right, and the master record selection and such will be the same also. The same options apply. So are you guys feeling confident with this? Is there something that maybe you want a little bit more explanation on? All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in. I think we're going to go ahead and end just about 10 minutes early. And remember, if you want a recording to log a case, and I will get that sent over to you once it gets uploaded. It will be a Dropbox link right now. If for some reason you can't access that, I'll see if I can't throw it up on YouTube, but my YouTube channel has been having a little bit of issues. So give Dropbox a try, and then if that doesn't work, we will go from there. So again, I just want to say thank you guys for joining me. I hope it was helpful. Please be sure to fill out that survey if you get it, and let us know how we're doing. All right, you guys have a good rest of the week and upcoming weekend, and good luck using demand tools. Oh, thanks, guys. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to sign off now. Bye-bye.